Hello, and welcome to Holistic Emails, Email and More, a Q&A with. I am your host, Skip Federa, and I'm struggling with a small technical glitch, but don't worry, we'll get that fixed in just a second. On today's episode, we are talking about the art of experimentation in email marketing. Now, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, this is really your show. Okay, we bring the experts, but it's your questions that drive the conversation. So it's unscripted, it's unrehearsed. Sometimes it's a bit of a train wreck, but it's always a whole lot of fun, and it's going to be very, very informative for you all today. Now, I'm going to share some slides with you. I'm going to invest here. There we go. Alrighty. So, as I said, we've got a great show lined up for you. We're going to explore how to design more sophisticated experiments. We're going to talk about converting your testing insights into long-term action. We're going to talk testing secrets from this group of successful email marketers. And we are going to have a very interesting conversation on AI-based strategies for tools for email testing. But before we go any further, we really need to thank our sponsors. So our platinum sponsor is RPE Origin, and our silver sponsor is Bloomreach. And a big thank you from all of us to all of you for everything you do to make this series possible. Now, we're going to have a new episode of Season 4. Can't believe this is Season 4, but we're going to have a new episode every month or so. But if you can't wait that long, check out Holistic Email's site. You can catch up on all the episodes from Seasons 1, 2, and 3. And if you missed it, we've got episode 1 from Season 4 up there as well. Now, like I said, we've put together a brilliant panel for you today. We have Helen Rankin, who's Managing Director at Cheeky Wipes, Richard Thomas, who's Campaign Engineering Officer at DRCX, John Conway, the Chief Data Hero, awesome title, at IOTA ML, and with me, as always, is best-selling author and award-winning thought leader, Kath Pei of Holistic Email Marketing. Now, folks, like I said, this is your show, so you need to get your questions in to the Q&A tab on the right-hand side of your screen. But to set the scene a little bit, I've been in email marketing since January of 2000. And in the early days, we sold it to old school direct marketers by showing them how email was trackable from cradle to grave. We know to whom we sent it, who engaged with it, who bought from it, all in real time. And in those days, all direct marketers had was who was on the file they provided the mail house, and 3 to 6 months later, who had bought the product. They just assumed the two things were related. And before I got into email, I was a marketing analyst at a bank on the East Coast. And one of my jobs every quarter was to compare the revenue reported in the financial reports with the revenue claimed by marketing. And marketing routinely counted the same revenue dollar 7 to 8 times. So marketers were never really sure about the effectiveness of their email campaigns and their tactics. Their marketing campaigns and their tactics. But of course, this real-time metrics were also a game changer for testing. Imagine running a test where you didn't get any results for 3 to 6 months. And then a lot of those results were based on assumptions. I sent this to person A bought it, must be because of my message and not because of anything else that my marketing department was doing, right? Email has allowed us to test everything from its very earliest days. In fact, testing features were one of the first to be added to email marketing platforms, way before drag and drop editors or automation journey builders. Email marketers became very good at running tests. The problem was that it was so easy and so cheap to test, there was really no incentive to learn. We ran tests because it was best practice. Sure, we knew which subject line performed better, but it was rare that we could use that result to teach us on how to construct the subject lines going forward. The other byproduct of this easy and cheap testing was that we did not have to think about where in our email program a key learning would drive the most value. Well, today, our brilliant panel is going to help you convert your testing into learning and help us determine what to test to drive the most value for our businesses. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our panel. Hey, gang, how's everybody doing?
That's good.
Good.
All right.
Okay, let's bring some energy. Hey, gang, how's everybody doing?
All right, Skip, how you doing? Let's get it going.
There we go. That's what I'd like to hear. All right. Okay, so don't have any questions in the Q&A tab yet. So before we get into it, I said that I've been doing this since 2000, and to put that into context to folks who maybe haven't been in the industry quite so long, I've been in email marketing since AOL was relevant. Come on, that's funny.
I mean, that means that for me, I was really just a kid at the time, finding as many of the AOL CD-ROMs so that I can get a free membership and create as many different accounts as I could. So
there you go.
Those are the early days where people would create, all the multiple accounts, and you would have your back in the, now we got the Twitter birds. Everybody has a Twitter bird account upon one account upon another account. So yeah, I honestly, I can't relate to sending emails through AOL. I can only relate to hanging out in the chat rooms. So,
well, Richard, I can tell you that AOL required its own format
to send the email.
So it was basically HTML light. So it could take, you could do things with fonts, but it wouldn't accept a table. So you couldn't send full HTML. Wow. So we used to have like AOL HTML and then plain text and then full HTML. But we're not here to talk about the history of email marketing, although, Kat, that could be a very interesting conversation.
I mean, that's an experiment in of itself, though, is text versus image-based. So, we can definitely dig into that, but go ahead.
Great segue. Thank you for that. Thanks for getting me back on track. Let's start with a couple of definitions, because I think there tends to be some confusion. So, in the prep, I found 6 different types of email testing, and the first 2, have been around for ages and ages and ages. A/B testing versus split stream testing. Anybody want to just make sure we're all clear on that before we carry on? Okay.
I'm going to say actually, because I'm not entirely sure, because to me, A/B testing, split stream, the only difference I could see between those, and I am making it up, so please feel free to correct me, is to me a stream feels like a flow. So it's, it's something that's there, it's a welcome email, or it's something like that you have going sort of all the time, and you can literally split that flow out, as opposed to A/B testing, which would be more of a one-off newsletter, campaign, whatever. If I'm wrong, feel free to correct me.
You're close.
Okay.
You're close. So, and these are my definitions. If anybody disagrees with them, jump in. Audience, you too. A/B testing. Take a sample. 50% gets version A, 50% gets version B, and you see who won. Split stream testing. You take a sample. A lot of people call it ABC testing. So you take a sample. Part of the sample half the sample gets version A, half the sample gets version B. You wait some period of time, pick a winner, and send the winner to the rest of your population. So Helen, you're right. If it was a newsletter, and you were doing, say, Richard's image versus text test, right? Version A might be the image version. Version B might be the text version. You let it sit in the field for 24 hours. Whichever one was getting the highest click-through rate would go out to the rest of your segment. And then, the other one that seemed really important, and I know we'll get into this later in the discussion, is multivariate testing, which is simply just I'm testing more than one variable at a time. Yeah, we all agree with that?
Yep.
Okay. Well, to a degree. Because, go on, Richard.
So, did you say keep going, Kath? Because I will.
Okay.
So, so with the multivariate, you have your different components of the email that you can test there, right? So you have everything from your subject line and your pre-header, everything that is visible in the email client, including even, your logo if you have BIMI in place. And so you You can decide whether or not you have a headless email. If you have BIMI, you can experiment with that. You can experiment with the different modules within the email, whether it's the top of fold where you have more text or you have a larger CTA. The different module components in your email are, from my perspective, what will go into the multivariate testing in terms of either identifying what call to action for CTA works best. What image? I've seen multivariant where there's gender-based testing included. Where you have a birthday message, and you want to make sure that you are sending a gender neutral versus a gender specific message. So those are the different forms of, from what I've seen in play for multivariant testing. I did want to kind of like speak more general, because a lot of different ESPs have their region within the the application, the platform, where you can perform different sorts of tests. Some of them limit you in the forms of testing, but I did want to speak more generally on testing, and it from the perspective of looking at a testing pyramid, where you have at the bottom of your pyramid you have unit tests, where those are some of the elements I just described: the subject line, the copy, images, links, CTAs, and then while you have your base, that's the base. It's a lot you can do. It's really the space where you should not do a lot. So you should maybe only explore subject line testing in one message. Maybe explore doing a different a headless versus a header versus a non-header email, or a CTA that has a stronger call to action versus something that's more nuanced to your specific product offering. And then you have your sort of middle level of the pyramid, where you have your integration test, where more or less you can decide that flow, that stream. How does this experience for one customer work timing wise? And then you want to be able to do more of those in order to identify that best time to send a message. And every ESP has a different sort of algorithm that they rely on. And then there's just if somebody opened the email yesterday at 5 p.m., send them an email again tomorrow at 5 p.m. But those are the sort of that's the middle of of your testing pyramid. And then I like to look at the top, really, where you have your end to end, because this is the most critical. And the point I want to make there is the top of the pyramid, end to end testing. If everything, you want to make sure everything functions, all the features, even in your ESP, are functioning as you expect them to, so that you can execute any of those other sorts of tests successfully. And that's all I wanted to say about that. But I definitely think that we can spin the wheels about the different types of testing, the different terms, from A/B to split stream to multivariant to frequency, etc. But I just want to introduce that concept of the testing pyramid, which also applies to software engineering, but I wanted to find a way to make it applicable here.
So at Holistic, we've actually created our own testing methodology based upon
cool.
which is based upon it, very much talking about what you're talking about. So multivariate is, if you generally use more for testing templates, right? Does this template, does this look and feel, does this a red button with a a pre-header with a this, with a that, and a that, does that all work well? Or should we go with this one? Okay, so you can be doing that there. But how we do it is that we actually test, because we start with a hypothesis, and when we test motivations. And so when you're testing motivations, what that means is, as long as everything that you're testing, whether it's subject line, call to action, first paragraph, landing page, imagery, and everything, all support the hypothesis, then you can test multiple factors within each of the emails. Does that make sense? So let's say loss aversion versus curiosity. Okay, so we've got two motivations there. Loss aversion, we would have the subject line, the call to action, the first paragraph, the imagery, the landing page and everything, all supporting the loss aversion. And then the next one will be all supporting the curiosity. So you're still only doing an A/B split test. You're still only testing 2, and you're still only testing your hypothesis is testing your the loss aversion versus curiosity. Okay, so it's still pure like that, and you can still at the end of the day determine which is the winner and why it's the winner, and you will walk away with learnings from it and insights that you can go and put into other campaigns and all the rest of it. So it still comes under that, but some people will like to regard it as being multivariate because you're testing multiple variants. But unlike a regular multivariate test where you can't actually determine why, right? You know which one did, but you don't know why. You don't know what it was. Was it the combination? Was it because of one particular feature? You don't know that. But with ours, you do, right? So that is kind of like another one that we can be putting in there as well.
Yeah, guys, maybe we'll go over this a bit more as we speak. But Kath, it was interesting to hear you say that, and if it helps, I really support what you've just said. So I've seen both sides of multivariate. I've seen, we rebuild the email around a hypothesis and a consumer psychology, and everything is geared around it. And then I've also worked places with very high throughput customer campaigns where we try and do the thing of isolating every element. And, all we run into on that one is usually like sample size issue, stability issue, not really sure where we would take those very small findings because we just haven't thought about the next step anyway. So if you can imagine, high throughput campaigning and testing, just because we're excited about testing, not because we're thinking of the psychology of the consumer that we want to affect. So I would say I'm backing you up on this one. The more successful tests I've seen in this space are starting from that kind of consumer, identifying all the elements and ending up with something that you can work with going forward. Maybe it's the places I've worked, but when you do the other side of, hundreds of variants, and I've worked places where we do hundreds of variants in the email platforms, it's sometimes difficult to roll out and decide what did we really want to do in the first place. So it's kind of, it's a bit like an academic study. When you go really deep on multivariate, it becomes very analytical, but without really, it becomes a strategy in its own right, rather than, where are we trying to go as the business, or which customers do we want to affect. So for what it's worth, yeah, I like it.
It's all very interesting, but not actionable. Which
you just concoct. Yeah, you have so many data points, so many. You can have unintuitive findings. So a header over here looks great. The same header over here combined with different elements looks terrible. There's noise in data, so just going too deep with too many variables can create this conflicting set of findings. And guys, I'm an analyst, so I love this stuff. But it leaves you with a position of, talking with marketers about, well, I haven't really got a conclusive finding here. We've simply created a load of output, and maybe we've lost where we're going. So, and like I said, I think from what I've just seen in life, you need to identify the segment. So, Kath, the holistic methodology is leave the customer in no doubts kind of what you're trying to project in this campaign is probably what I would vote as slightly more effective from my perspective than going really deep on multivariate things and even one-to-one targeting ideas. I've just seen the results be better. So it's not a matter of my philosophy. It's just campaigns I've seen that are working backwards from what we want to do, and particularly the psychology elements, traditional conservative, maximizing, satisfying, all of these different ways people consume information. Having taken that into account, I've seen good results.
Yes, and not only that, because you actually, think about it, right? Email, who is it that we're actually surveying? Because that's what a test is, right? We're surveying, we're asking them, what do you think? Do you like this? Right? And they will answer with their clicks or their conversions even. So we're asking that. And if we actually have a survey, do we want to ask them, do you like the blue call to action or do you prefer a red one? We're not going to ask them that. We're going to ask them what motivates them, what their needs are, those kind of things, rather than just those basics. So, and also with the actual elements, the colors and things like that and positioning, there's only so many things that you can do. Whereas when we're talking about actually asking people questions, about, which we're not going to do, except we are in a roundabout way, it's unlimited because we as humans are so complex. So this is what gets so exciting about doing this. And because we're actually asking our audience, right, our database, we're not paying on a landing page, we're not paying to drive traffic of random people to a landing page. We haven't even qualified them. We know our audience here. So they're actually qualified. However, whether we're testing our prospects, whether we're testing our long-term customers, whatever the story is, we're able to test them. We're able to then to find out what it is that they do like, and therefore we can be implementing that, like I said, in our future email programs, but also in other areas of the business as well, because we're questioning our database. But then, I mean, there's some great questions coming up here now, because they're very, very valid. Skip, I'm going to hand over to you, otherwise I'll go and answer one. Can't hear you, Skip. Nope, still can't hear you. Nope. Okay, you keep trying, and I'm going to go and ask the guys a question. So there's one. Let's get this, out of the way, right? We've got a question here. Let me go and put this up on the stage. Please explain end-to-end testing again. Okay, so.
Okay.
I think, but let's not go into too much details. Let's just talk about
absolutely
basic, sort of necessities that need to be done.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, on its face, with end-to-end testing, it's as simple as using whatever tool you're using for delivering the email to the end client. So that can be sending an email to all of the different email clients to make sure that it renders correctly, to make sure that the experiment that you're executing is in fact going to display the components of that message for your audience, whether it's an A/B test on a specific module within the email or copy. That's as simple as it gets. More complex end-to-end is to your point, Kath, around landing pages or tracking. You want to be able to make sure that if you're integrating with another tool to deliver those links, you want to make sure that those links are working and functioning as expected. So you, of course, again, want to send those emails to those email clients, and then from there, validating that whether you're testing a new landing page, that landing page, in fact, displaying as expected. Those are some of the most simple versions of end-to-end testing I could explain, but yeah.
Most of those are not to do with experimentation. Most of those are to do with functional, sort of, is everything working? Is the link working? Are the images rendering correctly? Is the format, rendering correctly, and all the rest of it? If we bring this over to experimentation, which I'm assuming we're talking about here, because that's what it's called, out of experimentation, then it's essentially, I believe the place to start is identifying what it is that you want to find out about your audience, right? Why are you testing? What do you want to be testing, and why do you want to be testing? That's a really, really good question. Are you testing just because, as Skip referred to earlier, you felt it's best practice and you should, or is it because you've got a burning desire to find out more about your audience? And this is where the hypothesis comes in. And this is where, when you're creating a hypothesis, what you need to do is, and this is why a lot of those factor testings don't work out. So if you're testing a red call to action button here and a blue call to action button here, they're actually very, very similar. There is a color difference, yes, but that's the only element you're testing in the email. There's a very good chance you're not going to get a statistical significant result because they're too similar. They're not different enough for the recipient to actually go, oh, that's going to motivate me to actually click that button and find out more, right? It's too small an improvement or a difference. Whereas when you're creating a hypothesis, you start with something here, like I said, loss aversion versus curiosity. They're quite different. Their motivations are different. And so you can be testing, and therefore the more different they are, the two factors that you're testing within your hypothesis, say it could be 3, 1, 2, but let's stick with 2 for the now. Then what that means is that you're more likely to get a statistically significant result because it will be quite different. So that's the first place to start. And then, as Richard said, then you want to pick it up and you're going to be creating those, adding it, to your email, your ESP, and sending it out. However, what we do is we don't actually do the regular, the ESP designated or provided tool. We don't tend to use that. And what that does is they'll say, we'll send A, the red button to 10%, we'll send B, the blue button to 10%. The 10% can be depending upon how big the sample size is, right? And then we'll send the winner to the 80%, right? And you have to designate a particular time and a particular success metric as well that they're going to be basing it on. We find that to be too restrictive, and not only that, not actually applicable for most of the things. Because when you're talking about time factor, look at it this way, right? We have the most opens. We know that. Open rates, we always get, a higher open rate than you do a click-through rate, and you get a higher click-through rate than you do a conversion rate. Okay, so it is like that inverted pyramid. We tend to be testing a lot of things like subject lines based on the open rates because we can, 2 hours have passed, great, we can send out the winner to it. But there's a very good chance that those results, you're actually optimizing for the wrong result. That 2-hour window is not long enough. Hence why what we do at Holistic is we will send out a 50-50 split. And that way we actually are sending out 50% of one and 50% of the other. And then we then get the luxury of a week to determine and to announce what the winner is, or depending on your product, if it's conversions, also if it's clicks and everything like this. It takes longer for those actions to happen, so we can't decide too soon. That's why we do the 50-50 split on that factor. And
Hey, Kath, can I?
Yeah.
Oh, you can hear me. Awesome.
Yes.
I was trying to figure out why I wasn't able to cut in before. That would be why. Apologies for that. My phone had decided to take over my microphone for some reason. But Kath, on that, just one of the pushbacks that I get from companies that I work with is when you say, okay, we're going to run a true A/B test, 50-50 split. Somebody, usually a finance person, comes back and says, well, yeah, but that means 50% of the audience gets a rubbish experience.
Right, and I hit that all the time. I come across that all the time. And in my opinion, it's not a rubbish, right? Because if you've gone and created your hypothesis, you've got a good reason for doing it. And normally it's your control will be one version. We're already using a red button, so we're going to test a blue button. So you're already sending to the red. And then you're going to go and test the blue. And I'm going to move away from that because it's a bad test. So let's talk about the loss aversion and the curiosity, right? So say if you've been using loss aversion a lot of late, and you're sort of going, oh, we're actually finding out it's depleting in its success because we're overusing it too much. Let's try something else, right? So you can be testing something else. I don't necessarily think you will definitely have you'll most likely have a winner and a loser for sure, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be absolutely horrendous, right? And if you've got a massive database, then you can do a pre-test if you want. But I personally don't think we never see, oh wow, that really that sucked. We don't ever have where the one
that was crap.
Yeah, totally tanked and totally sucked. Because you are the marketer and you have put your knowledge and your experience and your knowledge about the audience and the product all into account, okay? But the other thing too is that when they're doing it at that, they're talking about short term, right? So let's go and say we're not going to do it because of the short term factor, right? We don't want to risk, not doing as well short term, and we're actually prioritizing it over long-term insights. And these long-term insights can, over time, give you a massive uplift in your overall company revenue, right? So I see that as, yes, you will get a better one and a not as good one, okay? But that's investment into the future. That's how I see it. And that's how I was picturing it as well.
Skip and Kath,
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Sorry,
Go
Richard.
ahead.
I was
No, go.
I was going to say I really have two strategies for this, and Kath, you were getting close to my first strategy. I sometimes ask if there's any pushback as to why should I do this. An easy one is to say, you're assuming what we have today is optimal. Yeah. So what we have today is sometimes something that we've had for a long time, running in our campaign platform. So
we've always done it this way.
What you mean is it delivers you stable revenue that you like, but it may not be optimal. So that sometimes just brings people's guard down a little bit. And I think Kath was nearly getting there on this next point. I sometimes just value over the long term. Kath is part of it, and an extension of that I sometimes say, just to bring people around, is say, tell me about a brand you admire, or a brand that you think is great. People will say, yeah, I love Amazon, I love eBay, I love Netflix. And it only takes 5 seconds to do some research to uncover that they're, embraced experimentation at an extremely high level, and that it drives their business. And suddenly it's like, okay, I want what Amazon have. And of course, we're really just talking about really doing an A/B test. So we're at level 1. But the conversation can move on quickly then about the practical side of, I promise you'll get analytics, Kath. I promise we'll try and make it insightful and it will be virtuous going forwards. And then usually the marketers get what they want if we take that approach.
Yeah, I mean, it's what you were saying, Flip. People, clients are tend to say, this is how we've always have historically done it. Where there's opportunity right now for us to make history and then learn from that, experiment, and make that a part of our playbook going forward. And over time, the process of experimenting will become less arduous. It'll be less time consuming. And you really want to be able to take that opportunity to experiment, whether it is with identifying what your competitor is doing. I've seen experiments where you even introduce content to with the intent and motivating your customer to understand that your brand, your product is better than your competitor's product. And that's, identifying those consumers who like to be mavens and potentially explore one product or another. But you want to be able to create that loyalty. You want to create that affinity with your product. So it is always important to not continue to do things the way that you've always done them. It's a great opportunity to explore, those different whether it is a 50-50, you want to be able to introduce that opportunity to input some new content, some new whether it's your product. If your product has new features and functionality, you want to introduce that. You don't want to continuously try to drive home the same sale, the same message, the same call to action.
Well, Richard, that's a really nice handoff to Helen. Helen, I wanted to come to you.
Yeah, from my perspective, it's gone back to what Kath was saying, actually. So as a small business owner, the massive benefit for me in email testing is the long-term insight. So, when we started, it was right, and working with Kath, you'll remember, Kath, it was like, right, let's do a timing test. Let's test that over and over again to see when our customers are more likely to open emails, when they're more likely to convert, and getting that knowledge in place that then is sort of bedded in. And that's not to say we don't go back and do timing tests again, just to revisit and make sure our customer base hasn't changed, but it's sort of getting that sort of more long-term insight. Segmentation is another really good example of that. It sort of seems like common sense that we have products which are about babies or about periods and personal hygiene. And actually, although there is a crossover, there's also people that maybe can't have children don't want to be bombarded with emails about our baby products, and vice versa. And again, that was sort of born out in the early days of our testing, and now that's one of our principles. That's one of our insights that sort of that guide us. So again, and as a small business owner, we have a very small team managing our emails day to day. That would be me and Joe, that I think has been on the show before. And it's it's taken that testing down to what does give us sort of bang for buck. What can we test that will get us a quick, it very obviously opens more, or it obviously converts more, and sort of using those day by day, but more, exactly as Kath said, it's that sort of insight from testing that you can use longer term, your guiding principles for your business. And I think a lot of business owners probably agree with that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that leads into a great question that I don't think we've touched on yet, which is around sample sizes, list sizes, that sort of thing. Because obviously, Helen, when you were starting out, list wasn't terribly big either. So testing gets to be a little bit more complicated. John, you and I had a chat before before we came on air about statistical significance and sample sizes and whatnot. And you had a pretty interesting take on it. I guess my question is, let's start out with what is it? We've got a question from KK, which is, my list is a paid member-based, and she's only, this person only has 2,000 emails. So it's a bit small to get a good test. So, what suggestions do you have? First off, is that too small to get a good test? What is statistical significance, and does it really matter?
Okay, I'll answer them in a different order, Skip, if it's okay. So a bit of intuition.
That's not okay. Just kidding.
A bit of intuition for it. So, we're really measuring one thing against another. So, everyone in the audience can think of just a distribution that we're measuring A and B. There's two metrics like this. We're really, statistical significance is just looking at a distribution around each of those one things. It looks like a bell shape. It's called the normal distribution. And what we're checking is how much they overlap based on a formula. So we're really trying to understand uncertainty or certainty, if you like. That's an important point, because it's not, you'll hear people say it's 95% significant. Doesn't mean it can never be a different result if we were to repeat that test. So 95% significant means 1 time out of 20. If we did it over and over again, we might see a different result. So we're just kind of trying to express how certain we are in this finding. The comment, the question from the listeners on 2,000. This is not a big population, really. To estimate what type of sample sizes do we need a bit of information on what will we measure. So if the click rates would be those things that we're measuring, we need a sample size, the thing that we're measuring, and that's the part that helps us build that bell-shaped curve, around a metric we want to look at. So I suppose in answering the 2,000, it's a bit complex. It doesn't seem like a big number, and often in marketing analytics, tens of thousands are helpful. So I saw the audience member's question though, and I was going to suggest the Kath holistic method would be good to start there. So when the audience member said nothing seems to be working, if the things were in the space of subject lines, call to action buttons, something like that didn't seem to be working, maybe try and come at it from the buyer motivations or member motivations standpoint and understand what drives interest, what drives behavior. So for that one person with 2,000, I would try and take on board what Kath said and come at it from what are the reasons customers interact with the platform or company, and try and test around that. So, okay, we've done a bit of intuition on statistical significance. We're just testing for overlap based on an assumed distribution around it. So, Skip, your question is it important? Guys and audience, we're not curing cancer here. Let's remember this. We're trying to understand, is something we're trying, better than something that we already have? So there's a couple of ways you can look at it. I think, the thing that we're testing against, so we're doing A versus B, A could be very old. So an acceptable scenario that's sometimes missed is just A is very old and B is a facelift. If B is a bit more facelifted and a bit more in keeping with what we're doing in our brand, it could just be acceptable that it's a little bit better or even the same. That's one part, that we're not losing revenue is one part to it. Revenue is important. So revenue might be the case where if it's a revenue decision and a campaign generating multi-millions of pounds or dollars, we might want to pay a lot more attention to the statistical significance calculators and what's really happening here. So I'm saying if it's big revenue and very important, perhaps pay a lot of attention to it. If it's, my company's heading a certain direction and we're facelifting things and we just want it to be more in keeping with everything else we do, that maybe, brings down the success criteria to it can be just a little bit better or equivalent even. B can be equivalent to A and it's not such a problem.
Or not even that much worse.
Right, there we go. So statistically not worse would be one way we could look at that. And then on the small sample sizes and the Helen piece, I hope there's no statisticians on the call. I've tested these campaigns for a long time with these calculators. And I probably would say to you, when you look at aggregate data and do testing, you can kind of see things like, okay, this looks like a strong effect. So that looks good. When you jump down into things like daily data, weekly data, monthly data, you can sometimes see quite noisy information. So even at surface value, something that's statistically significant, you can see is quite noisy and can be all over the place even. So you maybe get lucky sometimes on aggregate, but over time it's less stable. I'm bringing that up because folk without the benefit of big sample sizes, I would say, look at the calculations. There's lots of calculators where you can test it, but equally, I enjoy seeing, email campaigns where 8 days out of 10, my challenger is winning or something like that, or 27 days out of 30, my challenger is consistently ahead. This just gives me a good feeling that I can expect this going forwards. So a little bit of a mix, Skip, is the answer. If you're a big brand, big budgets, big revenue, look very closely at statistical significance. If people are worried about their populations and want to get started, look for a stable result that just gives you, a good feeling when you look at it by day or week or something like this. You might never hit you might never hit statistical significance without waiting a year for very small campaign sizes. But if you're consistently pulling ahead, I think I would switch gears and roll out the winner.
So,
yeah, I love that. We're not curing cancer. Now, I don't know if this is controversial or not, Kath, but Yuval's asked for your comments.
Okay, can I just pop in there because I want to build upon what John was saying about the small, and I've got what we do as an answer, right? Because we work with lots of small e-commerce and small businesses and also large. So we flip-flop as needed. But essentially, we do work with clients who have got 2,000 on their database, 5,000 on their database, right? They're not great sample sizes for testing, but we will still do it because the alternative is not to test and never to learn and just to keep doing what you're doing, right? So whilst what I'm about to propose, which is basically taking on what John was saying, isn't 100%, right? But yes, as John said, we're not curing cancer. So what we do is we say, okay, you use the same hypothesis and you treat it more like a automation program or a landing page. So it's more of a time factor, right? Or a time factor until you get to the statistically significant sample size. That's what you do. So what you'll do is you're using that curiosity loss aversion one. You will do that and you'll keep running that test time and time and time and time again, right? Until you get to that point where you've got a big enough sample size and you've got the statistically significant result. And the fact that you're running that test doesn't mean that you have to use the same wording, doesn't mean you have to use the same imagery, the same offer, and like that, because it's a hypothesis. As long as they're supporting that curiosity and loss aversion, you're still running the same test. And that's what I'm saying. It's not absolutely as pure as if you're doing it in the one campaign or the one automation program, which is testing the exact same one, but it's better than not testing. And that's what we always go with. and advise.
This is going to be a real American phrase.
I definitely, just to your point, Kath, I when it comes to even talking with bigger companies, you want to be able to identify ways in which you can automate your tests to identify those segments, those personas of users that meet your specific, value, the offering, and return to do business and purchase your product or engage with your product. So I think that those are definitely the biggest opportunities, is finding that way in which you can automate the process of testing. One, to reduce your overhead on continuously executing manual tests and trying to, go to the Jackson Pollock or the Romeo Bearden approach of just throwing things out there, but you finding that way to create a systematic approach to executing and finding that audience will definitely help with creating a bigger opportunities to target your product to your consumer.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's interesting. I like the thought that I had while Kath, while you were talking. It was it's probably really inappropriate now because my grandfather said it, and anything that grandfathers said are generally inappropriate. But it's like close enough, like horseshoes or hand grenades. You don't have to be. We don't have to be bang on to find out the winner, especially in horseshoes. If anybody's ever played horseshoes or cornhole in America, you don't have to hit the target. You just have to be closest to the target, and every time you're closer, you're getting better off. So we've got another question in the Q&A. It's been sitting there for quite a while. And Helen, I want to pass this one. I want to direct this one to you first, because it's very much a brand marketer kind of question. So with so many different possibilities, I'll put it up here on stage. So with so many different possibilities for testing, how do you manage the testing strategy across multiple programs and time? And that programs one is quite interesting. Because, one of the things that we've talked about kind of in that last answer was, well, we can use time to help build up enough information to make a decision. But can you do that across programs, or do you have to keep those two things completely separate?
Oh, it is interesting. I mean, I possibly don't have the luxury or complications that make that really difficult for me. So from my perspective, again, it's looking at the things that will make most impact and focusing on those. Getting the automation in place, getting the automation testing in place, and then looking at those those bigger bang for buck things, the timing, the segmentation again, rather than sort of worrying too much about getting into a lot of granularity on that. Just there's only me and one other, so we just keep it sort of quite broad. I'm sure other people working with bigger companies have got a different take on that.
I think this kind of goes back to what tools you're using, and some certain ESPs give you an opportunity to create. Well, one and first and foremost, you have your email template, right? Typical email template can be as easy as a drag and drop within your ESP. Alternatively, you can have a developer who's building out an entire library of components that will go into the design of any of your programs or your ESPs if you have more than one. And from that, it gives you the agile functionality of saying, hey, I don't like this module. I'm going to swap this module out with another module in this HTML template that I have. Alternatively, you got the drag and drop where you can do the same thing. It's really, and from there, you really just want to have a menu of options. And I think having that menu of options gives you the foundation to then be able to move more swiftly to experimenting with the specific components within the email itself, the message itself. When it comes to other opportunities, specifically around work, executing the work of changing out subject lines or pre-headers, or the copy within the message, those can be, again, back to the ESP, depending on your ESP. If it's as easy as how you get a return on your data analytics. Some Delta files for your messages, you don't get the analytics as thoroughly as you like within the next 24 hours to make actionable choices on how to change components or elements of your testing. Others give you that in more real time, and you can act on those accordingly by creating some conditions that will decide which component to display on day 2 versus what you showed on day 1. There's all in considering those conditions even is an opportunity, which I'm going to give this to you, flip to segue, is artificial intelligence, which will definitely take you in a direction where it will help influence that process of reducing the time to execute those tests across those multiple programs.
Well, let's go there, because I said it was unrehearsed, but Richard, you just keep handing me the segues, and I'm just going to keep going with them. So thanks for that. You're making my life easy today. So we've got about 8 minutes left, and we're basically going to try to cram the history of the world into 8 minutes. Not quite. So there's a lot of talk about using AI across the entire spectrum of email production. And I don't want to get into it across that wide a range, but what are some of the new tools that people should be looking at? And maybe if we think about this from size of company, AI driven, not really AI, they're all machine learning driven tools that help us with testing. And what are some pitfalls in that realm as well that we should think about?
I'll start with the basic, because I'm not an analyst, I'm not techie. ChatGPT is something that my 19-year-old son, who's doing computer science at uni, has been talking about, and it's newish. There's a lot of articles about it. I'm at the point of, okay, I'm going to drop email content into ChatGPT and ask it to come up with a subject line for me. And for the next little while, I'm going to test their subject lines, assuming it sort of works for our tone of voice. I'm going to test theirs against ours and see where we'll get to. I'm at the very start of the AI learning curve. I don't know where it goes from here, and I'd really love to hear what people who know more about it than me think we could be doing with it. I know you could get it to create content. I'm not completely sure I'm comfortable with that. But yeah, I'm really interested to hear what everybody thinks.
Yeah,
that's a great setup.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in. I just got announced today. Well, the subject line tool is in beta, which is using ChatGPT to help. So that will make your life a lot easier when it actually is released, Helen. Mm-hmm. And I can't say, because it's still only in beta. It's only invitation as yet. But ping me, message me, tweet me, whatever it is, and I'll let you know when it's launched. Right. The other thing is what is really, really good. So if we're talking about those motivations, again, curiosity versus loss aversion, we could be instructing that. We could be prompting, ChatGPT to actually be writing those emails. You give them, this is the offer. This is what we're talking about. And then write it from this perspective. Write it from this perspective. So we can help you to save time in actually creating your tests as well. So I think there's a lot of future just for that as very simple, often free or very cheap kind of tools that are going to make our lives as email marketing testing experts so much easier. But then there's other amazing tools like John's, IOTA. So you've got something like that, which takes the whole email testing to a different level, and different level of sophistication, different level of results, all the rest of it. So this AI is just, it's here
Big,
to
huh?
stay.
Yeah, we're trying, Kat. We're really trying. Thank you for that. So, Skip, in answer to your question, what everyone should be doing is working with small machine learning companies like IOTA. It's a joke, but yeah, we're really trying to actually build simple tools that marketers can adopt. Actually, so the bit we're really trying to push on is, this is a difficult area, difficult set of tools to integrate into a marketer's workflow. Everyone has enough work already. So one of the big challenges is how to take on these extra touch points in your campaign workflow, so that your day doesn't explode. So one of the areas I'm involved in is trying to do this. And Kat, thanks for the setup. What we're trying to do with machine learning is fuse kind of A/B testing and experimentation with just targeting. So A/B testing, the assumption in it is that if we roll out a winner, that's good for every audience type. Well, that can't be right, because if we move into a different marketing domains, like brand or something like this, we would always talk about different customer needs. But A/B testing on the surface doesn't end with customer type A, customer group X get A, customer group Y get B. And so this is some of the work that we're trying to do with machine learning in this space. So Skip, you'd commented on what are some of the watchouts in adopting machine learning and going into this space. I was going to say, the bit in A/B testing, or one of the most fundamental parts to it, is just like in medicine. It's a randomized control trial. So the reason it works is it's randomized. Yeah. So we should get an answer based on that experiment. When we move into machine learning things, it's modeled. ChatGPT is modeled. If you've read about how it hallucinates, this just means that some of its findings are too tightly attached to the training data set. So it kind of gives you slightly spurious answers. No different when we try to bring machine learning into our workflow as campaign managers. We're starting to use machine learning, which will fit to what training data we have or what types of data that we have. So my only watch out, Skip, is a good practice really is that everyone should try and adopt machine learning, but be thinking about how they back test and validate that it's working for them. So I would kind of, we talked about control groups a little bit, and not so much the holdout groups that we talked about before this call, but I would really just encourage people to think about, how do I adopt machine learning? Where should I apply it? And how do I make sure that it's working for me? And if you do that last step, either keep existing variants running of your campaigns, or figure out what your control group strategy should be. If you do those things, you'll be able to answer, the question from your boss as to, what is machine learning doing for me?
Yeah. Richard, you want to bring us home?
I mean, I just, to that point, I've seen the importance of having that control in action, and in fact, going to be rolling out a machine learning experiment in a few weeks that does leverage that control. I do where there's one version of the message that follows the existing behavioral flow of the messages, and then another where we allow the machine learning algorithm to randomly decide how those messages are going to be delivered to the consumers. Where I've seen, the machine algorithm in another situation completely take control. And what I mean there is you can allow in AI, it's not really AI, it's more machine learning, because it's still based on data that in more ways than none, we've kind of just said, hey, this is the data, this is how you analyze the data, and this is how you will execute this particular message. But there's scenario, for example, where a lot of those typical behavioral triggers, those intent messages, the browse your website, the click the link, the add it to your cart, that can be included in sort of a machine learning algorithm environment that can be inclusive of not just those messages, but other messages that are more about motivations and your preferences. And what I've seen with machine learning algorithms that have a plethora of different message types, behavioral triggers, and the explosion of all of this data at its availability, is that you can find yourself losing on the peaks that your messages previously performed at, because you're not you've stopped testing, and you've really allowed this algorithm to take over, where you don't have the system to say, human intuition to decide this message should be sent literally, in real time. The moment somebody added an item to a cart, that message should go within the next hour. It should not be considered within the sum of 5, 6, 7 different other messages, and say, oh, this message takes priority over the abandoned cart message. There are things that we know work. There are message types that we know work without the need for them to be a part of a machine learning algorithm. So those are just some of the things that, I think you can, any brand, you will know which messages should definitely be exclusive of a machine learning model,
Sure.
and messages that should definitely be a part of your machine learning model. And even when you find a pattern that works, sometimes you can say, the messages that aren't a part of it, maybe they should be a part of it, and we should follow this particular logic model in order to deliver those messages. So
Well, that's a great point, Richard, and a great. Unfortunately, where we're going to have to leave it. But if I can summarize what I think, what I kind of heard everybody saying, to one degree or another, around the AI is adopt it, don't be a slave to it, and make sure you're still in control.
Yes.
Which I think is a good takeaway for everybody in all points of life, not just with AI, but definitely with AI, because someday your ESP will become self-aware and it will kill you at your desk. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Anyway, folks, that's all we do have time for today. Do please let us know what you thought. Leave us some comments in the chat. We'd love to hear what you think. Join me in giving a big thanks again to our our platinum sponsor, RPE Origin, and our silver sponsor, Bloomreach. And of course, a tremendous thank you to our panelists for providing their invaluable insights. But most of all, I want to thank you for spending your time with us today. We know you're busy, and we know that you have plenty of things that are keeping you occupied. But we really do appreciate that you took the time to spend an hour with us today. Now, Kath and I will be back on May the 9th talking about secrets to crafting a compelling subject line or compelling subject lines. But until then, be safe and make good choices.